say a thing. The smile on your face lets me know that you need me. There's a truth in your eyes saying you'll never leave me. The touch of your hand says you'll catch me.
He had one of the purest voices in country music, a voice that dazzled and influenced a generation.
Yeah, you say it best when you say nothing at all.
There are just those certain people that come around occasionally in a lifetime that affect you when they sing. And like Streisand, you know, and Frank Sinatra, and those kind of people. Keith, to me, is in that kind of category.
Everybody from Garth Brooks, Tim McGraw, Alan Jackson, I think they were just people that as he went by listened to his music and said, you know, that's exactly who I want to be like.
Keith Whitley's singing was infused with emotion, and for good reason. Throughout his short life, Keith battled personal demons that he could never quite control. And by the age of 34, he was gone, just as he reached the stardom he'd sought for so long.
He was such a gifted talent, but frail at the same time. Greatness and sadness, kind of all at once. I think he would have been considered one of the greatest country music singers of all time. Still is in my book, if not the.
When you say nothing at all.
The Keith Whitley story began deep in bluegrass country, the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. Keith was born here in the small town of Sandy Hook, and he didn't take long to start singing.
Keith was a colicky baby, and he cried at night, and it was always my job to get up and rock. But as he got older, if we sang to him, he would take his little hand and put it up to our mouth, and then he would try to hum. So yes, he came into the world singing, is what I said.
Keith was immersed in country music from the time he was born. His parents, Elmer and Fay, had a fine record collection and were musicians themselves.
Our mother played piano, organ, and guitar, a little bit of banjo. Our father played harmonica, and my mother's father, my grandfather, played five-string banjo, and he taught me to play the banjo, and which Keith played some banjo too. But actually, my mother was the one that really got us started on guitar.
He'd just say, "I want you to show me this little bit on this song," or that he loved Lefty Frizzell, George Jones, anything of theirs. So he could just hear it one time and pick it up, start playing it.
Keith began his public singing career at the age of 4, entering a local talent contest.
And he won it. He sung Marty Robbins' Big Iron. And he had on a black cowboy outfit, and they asked him, "Will you do another song for us?" He just unbuckled his gun belts and let them fall to the floor and started out on Did I'm a Wandering Soul.
At the age of 8, he was singing on local radio.
We have a wee little guest here we want to bring in, Keith Whitley.
He never talked about anything else. Singing was all he ever wanted to do. And I said to him once, even when he was in high school, I said, "Don't you think when you finish high school that you ought to take a course in something else?" And he looked at me real hurt, and he said, "Mom, I don't plan to ever do anything but sing."
But singing wasn't young Keith's only passion. His love of motorbikes, a lifelong affair, was evident early.
He always had his bike, He had a motorcycle, a trail bike when he got old enough, and he had little pedal cars and things he could do. He rode up and down the driveway here.
After his early success, Keith couldn't wait to get on stage, and he talked his older brother into letting him join his high school rock and roll band.
Of course, he was the youngest member, but he sang lead. He was a better singer than any of us. And then I got back into bluegrass, real good, real heavy into bluegrass, and got Keith into that.
It was at a bluegrass convention in Kentucky in 1969 that Keith met another promising 15-year-old musician by the name of Ricky Skaggs.
And they just hit it off, and they sang together. And when he come home, he told me, he said, I've met a guy that I think I'd like to play music with.
We invited Ricky over the next weekend to sit in on our radio show, which we had going here. We'd tape it on Wednesday nights, and it was aired on Saturday and Sunday at a little station out of West Liberty, Kentucky. And Ricky came over and just started from there.
Hey friends, we'd like to say another great big howdy to you and welcome once again to the Mountain Rule Telephone Show. My name's Keith Whitley, and as you know, all the boys that you'll be listening to. Down the road here from me, there's no hollow tree where you lay down $1 or 2.
We used to play in a little place in West Liberty, Kentucky, where they had an outdoor drive-in theater, and we'd get up on the roof and play, and if the crowd liked it, they'd all honk their horns. They could hear us through the PA set, you know.
It wasn't long before Keith and Ricky caught the eye of bluegrass legend Ralph Stanley. It was a break that would set them both on the path to stardom.
Oh, they call it that good old Mountain Dew, and them that refuse it.
The Life and Times of Keith Whitley returns in a moment on TNN. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley continues on TNN. By the age of 15, Keith Whitley and Ricky Skaggs had become the talk of the bluegrass world. They were asked to open a concert for one of their heroes, Ralph Stanley.
They were singing and playing when Ralph got there, and he just come in and sit down on the front row and listen to them. And he was just amazed by it, because anything that he asked them to do of his and Carter's old songs, they could do it.
Now, Mr. Roosevelt told me just how he felt when he heard that the brows on through. If your liquor's too red, it'll swell up your head. You better stick to that good old Mountain Dew. Oh, call it that old Mountain Dew, and a matter if you let a few. I'll hook up my mug if you fill up my jug with that good old Mountain Dew.
In 1970, Ralph Stanley invited both 15-year-olds to join his band, the Clinch Mountain Boys. Ralph called Keith the most talented singer he'd ever worked with. They toured with Ralph's group for the next 2 years. It was a sudden adult dose of the spotlight. And being on the road so young, touring as far away as Japan had its price for Keith. It was as a teenager that Keith first started drinking heavily.
You saw things that probably a 15-year-old shouldn't see. You know, when you're on the road with an adult band, you know, it's, of course, Ralph was like a father to Keith, and I'm sure he took good care of him and watched over him and Ricky both. But still, you know, you worry about them when they're on the road. You know, when you play like a bluegrass festival, you've always got a friend there that's going to hand you a beer or a drink or something when you come off stage, and it's available. And a 15-year-old is not mature enough, you know, to say no. And I'm sure Keith, you know, that was probably when he started, and when he probably developed the problem was during those years.
He was always with older people. And that was one thing that I look back on and think that, you know, I wish maybe he could have been with people his own age more, but everybody that was in the music business was older than him, and he just had to be with them. And he just seemed like he grew up so fast. This was Keith's room, and he loved it so much. Of course, it was quite different when he was here. He had more guitars and things in here, but this is a guitar that he brought me, and He said, don't forget how to play and keep this until I call for it. So it was very important to him, and he used it on a lot of his records. And he'd been to a couple of trips to Japan. And that's a picture of one of his heroes there. Elvis was one of his heroes. He loved him very much. Every morning I'd knock on his door and I'd say, you ready for your coffee? I'd bring his coffee to him. And at night, if he come in and he was real tired, I always massaged his shoulders till he went to sleep. But if he come in and I was asleep, he always come to my room to let me know he was home. And if he thought I was asleep, he'd pinch my toe. I'm home, Mom.
Keith spent 5 years on and off playing with Ralph Stanley's group. But by the time he reached his early 20s, Keith was beginning to look beyond bluegrass. He was yearning to sing more in the straight country honky-tonk style of his hero Lefty Frizzell.
Keith had these dreams of being able to play real country, sing real country music with a steel guitar and a piano and all things that he didn't have access to in the bluegrass world, you know. A drummer, things like that.
In 1978, he joined the band J.D. Crowe and the New South, which blended traditional and modern styles of country music. Around this time, Keith was earning a word-of-mouth reputation in Nashville as a real musician's musician.
I said, this guy is like the cat's pajamas. You have to hear this. This is real country music. This is what it's all about. And that's how we got acquainted, because I was a fan. So we, through one means or another, a bunch of us here in Nashville encouraged him to move to Nashville.
Keith, now married to his Kentucky sweetheart Kathy, did decide in the early 1980s to move to Nashville, where his friend Ricky Skaggs had already made it big. But Keith found that money and bookings were both scarce.
He was basically starving to death, and he had no ready source of income, so every now and again my wife and I would invite him and his then wife Kathy over and feed them spaghetti and talk about country music and what we loved, and that's how we became friends.
For a country traditionalist like Keith, it was not the best time to arrive in town.
At the time that Keith really came on the scene in Nashville, country music was going through such a big change where we didn't know if bluegrass was considered country or pop was considered country, or really back then country was not happening. I mean, it wasn't cool. But I think with Keith, he felt like they didn't want that from the heart thing. It was, we need up-tempo, we need catchy lyric, we need catchy titles, and I think that was very distressing to Keith.
It was a tough time for a young man who'd always secretly doubted his own ability.
Keith never really knew how good he was, and he never really knew how many friends that he had and how many people was behind him. He never really knew that. I wish he could have known it more. He was always afraid that he wouldn't please somebody else. He always looked at it that way.
Keith was a bundle of self-doubt. He was outwardly incredibly charming and very, very funny, but inwardly was a scared boy. And Nashville can be very intimidating when you're from a little town called Sandy Hook, Kentucky. And I don't think he ever really got over that feeling of maybe I'm not good enough.
Those close to Keith believed this self-doubt might have propelled him into his occasional damaging drinking binges.
I think Keith turned to alcohol because of his confidence. He lacked confidence in himself, and possibly that would give him more confidence.
I think he saw where all the great singers have been before him. And that's his George Jones, and Lefty Frizzell, Hank Williams. All these people were considered great, but they all were known for their drinking. And I think that part scared him. I think in a way Keith didn't think he deserved success. It's almost like Keith was always trying to punish himself for something.
Keith was also haunted by the loss of his older brother, Randy, who was killed on his motorbike near the family home in 1983.
Keith didn't like to deal with problems, and that was such a tragedy because it was the first time in our family that anything had happened like that. And I think that, I don't believe he ever dealt with it. I think that Randy's death contributed to a lot of his problems.
Although Keith had his problems and self-doubt, no one in Nashville doubted that one of the great country voices had arrived in town. Soon he would make the breakthrough he dreamed of since childhood. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley returns in a moment on TNN. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley continues on TNN.
Keith Whitley.
This is a song that I wrote with Curly Putman and Don Cook, and it's called New Kid in Town. We're looking for the King, the new Messiah. We're following the star, shining bright.
When he first came to Nashville, Keith soon found he was not the overnight sensation he'd hoped to be. His traditional roots didn't blend with the new wave of modern country, but vocally, there was no doubting his natural gift.
Incredible range. He could go down, hit a bass note, and then turn right around, hit an almost falsetto note, and not miss a lick. I mean, he was incredible.
He was absolutely amazing. There was times on stage when I would absolutely lose my train of thought as far as a player, and get involved in what he was singing and his emotions and totally lose where I was at. Forget what song I was playing.
It was only a matter of time before Keith landed a recording contract. He signed with RCA, the label of one of his heroes, Elvis Presley.
When Keith signed, I'll never forget, I gave him the contract, and he wanted to sign it there on the spot. And I said to him, you can't do that. He said, well, no, I mean, you know, if you're giving me this must be fine, blah, 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 and all that stuff. I said to him, Keith, you really need to get a lawyer. He was just so excited about being signed to RCA that it didn't make a difference.
But Keith's excitement dimmed a little after he cut his first record for RCA. The radio station said it was too country.
It didn't work. I mean, it was just embarrassing what happened. I mean, nothing. But it was that time in the format where we were just coming through the Millsaps and the Dollies and the Crystal Gales and the Kennys, and we were moving more towards a mainstream sound. And even though Keith was a great singer, he was still very traditional as an approach.
Keith began to select more modern material to sing and had a few minor hits. It was around this time, in 1985, that Keith first met Nashville singer Lorrie Morgan, daughter of Grand Ole Opry star George Morgan.
We heard this voice coming out of the studio, and I was just blown away by this voice. And the guy was singing "Does Fort Worth Ever Cross Your Mind," which later became a George Strait hit. And I said, who is that singing in the studio? So we walked in the studio, and just this breathtaking man with a face to match the voice. I mean, everything was just beautiful about this guy.
I told her I loved her and I wanted to stay. She said, be sure, and I'll call you that way. Leaving in a taxi, I could hear my telephone ring. Called me from Miami.
Keith's life was changing in many ways. His marriage was failing, with alcohol being one of the reasons. But professionally, he was about to have the breakthrough hit he'd been waiting for, Miami, Miami.
There are artists today, young artists, I'm thinking in particular of Tim McGraw, who can date his interest in becoming a country singer from hearing Miami, Miami on the radio. And I think that was the one where people started to go, you know, this is a real singer.
The song reached the top 15 and spent 20 weeks on the charts.
The one thing about Keith, though, you could take him 10 songs by 10 different demo singers, 10 different styles, and when Keith got done with it, it was Keith's.
This song came on the radio. It'd been recorded, and it was Miami, Miami. And I just pulled the car over the side of the road, and I was like, my God, somebody recorded this song and did it better than the demo, and it's great, and who is singing it? That's the number 20 song this week. It's Keith Whitley and Miami, Miami. And I went, Keith Whitley. And there he came again.
After Keith's divorce, he asked Laurie if they could get together. And within a few months, they were engaged, despite warnings from some that they weren't suited for each other.
Keith was a worldly guy. Not a very good track record as far as his drinking was concerned, and so it was one of those forbidden kind of loves that I suppose, looking back, maybe made it a little more intriguing to both of us, a little more exciting. Somewhat like Romeo and Juliet. When something's forbidden, you can't help but, stick your fingers in there.
In November 1986, Keith and Laurie were married, and soon fans were calling them Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. For Keith, having two musical careers in one household was a definite plus.
When I have a bad day, she knows what to say to me. She lets me have a bad day, I guess is what I'm trying to say, And I don't have to be Keith Whitley, the entertainer, when I come home.
Keith was certainly putting his hometown of Sandy Hook on the map. At a special ceremony, one of the town's streets was renamed Keith Whitley Boulevard. And soon there was another naming ceremony for the Whitleys. In 1987, Keith and Laurie's son Jesse came into the world.
He was born yesterday morning at 4:45, and I was en route from Brookville, Pennsylvania, so I missed the blessed event. My bus arrived home about 10 o'clock yesterday morning. I think they'd had every highway patrol from Nashville to Pittsburgh looking for me, and somehow or other we made it through without anybody finding us.
Keith was now father to two children. He legally adopted Laurie's daughter Morgan from her first marriage.
He was a wonderful father. He thought of Morgan as his little girl, and she was crazy about him, which made him even love her more. He would talk to Jesse and say, "You have such a beautiful mommy. I'm going to be the best daddy." And he was always a part of it. He knew how to make the formula. He knew how to wash and sterilize the bottles. And some mornings he would let me sleep.
Everything finally seemed to be going right for Keith Whitley. A new family and 3 top 10 hits to follow up Miami, Miami. But Keith's secret torments were not yet finished with him. They would soon visit him again. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley returns in a moment on TNN. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley continues on TNN.
I love her.
Although Keith Whitley had a new family and a blossoming career, there was still an underlying sadness inside him. Even a special love song he wrote and recorded for Laurie at home was tinged with premonitions of fate.
Keith's talent came to him easily. It was the other stuff that was hard, the stuff that goes along with being successful, the schedules, the going out of town, the being away from people he loved. That was the hard part.
The pressures and loneliness of touring tempted Keith to reach for the bottle, even though he tried desperately hard to resist, often staying sober for months at a time.
There was times I've seen Keith where I think you could absolutely pour it on his head and he wouldn't stuck out his tongue to taste of it. But if the urge hit him, there was no time for him to waste. He had to have it now. Got to a point to where if he couldn't get the alcohol, he'd drink whatever he'd get his hands on. Empty 409 bottles, empty Windex bottles. Everybody's cologne was gone. Shampoo, just anything that was liquid was on the bus was gone.
Mike and other band members became unofficial bodyguards, sitting outside Keith's door so that he couldn't go out for a drink.
He knew he couldn't move me out of the way, so he would fire me. Get up, you're fired. Get up, you're fired. Well, I'm your friend, Keith. If you're going to fire me, you're sure not going to get a drink. So you might as well sit down.
I've seen people offer him a drink and he'd tell them, I don't drink. He never kept it in the house. So, alcoholism is like cancer or heart disease. Some people have it, they don't want it, they can't help it.
I don't know if he's ever told this to anyone else, but he told me, he said, Blake, he said, I have incredible stage fright. He said, every time I walk out on the stage, I'm scared to death. And he said, that's one of the reasons I drank.
Keith was persuaded many times to check into treatment centers, but he did so reluctantly.
Things he needed to really be direct with and confront that he couldn't. Even in all the treatment centers that he was in, I don't believe he ever really discussed what was really bothering him. He was in total denial. I never heard Keith Whitley say, I'm Keith Whitley and I'm an alcoholic. Never heard it.
When Keith spoke publicly about his drinking, he spoke of it as a problem he'd already kicked.
Well, Peter, kind of a wild life would be an understatement, to say the least. I was brought up in a part of the country, a real rural area in eastern Kentucky, and fast cars and drinking was kind of part of growing up, and that carried over into my adult life, unfortunately. And when it kind of began to interfere with my career, I decided that I needed to change a few things and get my life together, so to speak. And my career and personal life and everything has been a lot better since I decided to do that.
At home, Laurie went to extraordinary lengths to make sure he didn't steal a secret drink.
I tied my leg to his with my terry cloth robe belt. So if he got up in the middle of the night, I would feel him tugging on my leg, and it would wake me up, and I'd go to the bathroom with him or do whatever he needed to do, and he never got mad. But it was almost like, Jesus Christ, Laurie, or come on, honey, just let me go to the bathroom by myself. I'm not going to do anything. And I know that it was a lie. I couldn't just say, forget you, I'm out of here. Because he was good to me. And he made me love him. So you wanted to cure this person and help them.
Keith's many friends in the business were also helpful and forgiving, because Keith was one of the best-loved people in country music. Keith was famous for his sense of humor, especially his ability to mimic other country stars.
Lester Flatt gave me an old guitar that he had played for years and years in 1975. And after that, when we would work shows together, he would come up to me and he'd say, Lester, how long you had that old guitar? I'd say, oh, I've had her about 15 years now. And he always cracks up. He loved the imitation.
Keith never lost his sense of humor or his sense of where he came from. He made this commercial for a local Kentucky car dealer.
Howdy. I'm looking for the little pig dealer. The little pig dealer? You mean the little big dealer? Little big dealer? Howdy. I'm looking for the little pig dealer. The little pig dealer? You mean the...
By 1987, Keith had good reason to laugh. He began work on a new album that would vault him to the level of superstar. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley returns in a moment on TNN. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley continues on TNN.
I know you love him a long time ago, and even now in my room, you still want him right.
1988 saw the crowning achievement of Keith Whitley's career with the album and single called Don't Close Your Eyes. It marked a return to his traditional country roots and became his first #1 song.
When you hold me true, don't close your eyes.
He just wanted to do straight ahead, solid country music without the pop overtones so much. He was proud of the success he'd had. He just wanted to take the next step deeper into what he was doing. Keith just stood there and let it go, and it was magic.
He was so proud. He said, "This is my favorite album I've ever done. I finally feel like we've captured what Keith Whitley is about."
Don't close your
Don't Close Your Eyes was named Country Music Song of the Year, and the follow-up single also went to #1, I'm No Stranger to the Rain.
I've fought with the devil, got down on his level, but I never gave him something he gave up on me.
The first time I played it for him, he just was floored. He said, man, somebody's been reading my mail. He said, this song is me. And it was just one of those songs we identified together on right away. And he really felt like that song was about him.
I've been sacrificed by brothers, crucified by lovers, but through it all I will still remain. I'm no stranger to the rain.
And just as Keith's career was taking off, so was Laurie's. She now had her own hit singles and tour dates.
Oh, man, he was all for it. I used to go to Laurie's band rehearsals, and I was Laurie's agent also. And Keith would come over there, and Laurie would ask him, well, what do you think? He'd say, man, you know, this guy's a hot player, this guy's good. I think he was very, very supportive.
But Laurie's success was also a strain on Keith.
I think he was afraid that I would have success and make money and not depend on him and leave him.
When he was around people, he was okay. But there was something there, Laurie leaving, you know, just before the promo tour when we were about to embark on that whole thing, and don't go, don't go.
By early 1989, Keith was drinking hard again and almost killed himself when he crashed his car. His whole demeanor seemed to have changed.
There was a look in Keith's eyes the last few times he was on television that was very sad, distraught, troubled. That sparkle that was in Keith's eyes and the smile, and it was gone.
It's almost like you You live what you sing to a certain degree, and he wrote that song, I've Done Everything That Hank Did But Die.
By May of '89, RCA was telling Keith he had to get treatment or face being dropped from the label.
That was never something that I was going to do, but just like a kid, you know, I'm going to take away your toys. And he said, no, don't do that. I'll do anything. I will do anything. I said, well, you got to go in this time, Keith, and you got to stay. And you got to come out clean and sober. I'll do it. Don't do that, please.
At this same time, Keith was trying to persuade Laurie not to go on her own promotional tour, and Laurie was torn about what to do.
I didn't want to go in the first place. I knew we had a problem before we left. And I called the record label, I called my manager, and I begged them not to make me go. And I knew something bad was going to happen. I knew it.
Unfortunately for Keith and all those who loved him, Laurie's fears would prove well-founded. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley returns in a moment on TNN. The Life and Times of Keith Whitley continues on TNN. In May of 1989, Laurie Morgan was on a promotional tour, but worried about the welfare of her husband back in Nashville. She was right to worry. Keith Whitley had gone on a drinking binge.
He went on just a wild binge that weekend, and I wasn't there to help him. And that destroyed me for a long time. He was wild. He was drunk. He was doing coke. And nobody was there to save him.
On Tuesday morning, May 9th, Keith was sober, drinking coffee in his home near Nashville. 2 hours later, he was dead. The cause? An alcohol overdose, with the equivalent of 20 shots of liquor in his system. Keith Whitley was 34 years old.
I had, for 2 weeks, I had a real bad feeling. It was like something was pulling me down. I talked to Keith that morning for probably 30 minutes, and he was fine. And in 2 hours later, they called me that he was gone. And my first words when they told me said, Keith is gone. I said, gone where? I thought he had just went out someplace in his vet. And they said, Keith is dead. And I could not believe it. It was the worst shock of my life.
For Laurie, stranded out on the road, the reaction then, and for a long time after, was to blame herself.
You know, I would look at Jesse and Morgan and I would think it's my fault that they don't have a dad. And it's my fault, you know, that they're going through, Jesse's going through, when's Daddy coming home? When's Daddy coming home? And it took me years to realize that it wasn't my fault. It was Keith's fault. Keith drank himself to death, not me. You can't cure them. No matter if you stay, no matter if you leave, they've got to cure themselves.
Keith's death sent shockwaves through the country music world. People could hardly believe he was gone so soon.
I mean, the guy was loved. For everybody who'd been cheering for him, and there he was at the top of the heap, and then he died. It was like, it wasn't fair.
At the Whitley home in Sandy Hook, the family has Keith's memorabilia on display for the thousands of fans who come through each year.
Oh, you wouldn't believe. And from our other states, and we happen to come from Alaska, we happen to come from Japan, and it's amazing. That's about all I have time to do, is to entertain the people that want to come through and just see Keith's things where he grew up.
I can't stand to be
tale. It's so easy for the blues to get me down.
Keith Whitley's time at the top was brief, but his legacy is long. He remains one of RCA's top sellers each year, with his greatest hits album going platinum. Even more importantly, he continues to influence an entire generation of singers.
So many people come up to me and, singers today, and, oh man, Keith was my favorite singer, and nobody will ever touch him, and that's a great compliment, and unfortunately, he doesn't know that.
I'll never forget the first time being in the studio, and the engineer I was working with pulled that vocal mic up, and Keith was singing, and it just floored him. He said, "My God, listen to that voice," and that was kind of the way Keith affected a lot of people.
I haven't found anybody that compares to him. So when you kind of find the Mona Lisa, you kind of know when there are imitations around, and when you also know when you got one. And literally, he was unbelievable.
It was all about heart and singing it and true and not production. It was about the song and the singer. I think probably, if anything, his legacy has left us that.
And it tears me up to see a grown man come. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Keith Whitley.